specific to the physical geography here, the climate. And most of my clients, they're just interested in making money, right? That's why everybody's starting a business, is to be lucrative. Some people have ulterior motives, but in the end, these are businesses that we're focusing on, and being profitable and competitive in this industry, it can be difficult. So I've been lucky enough over the last 18 years to be involved in a lot of different kinds of cannabis agriculture. This is the 5th state that I've been involved in cannabis agriculture, and I've helped to grow tens of thousands, maybe in the hundreds of thousands of plants range. And what's really interesting about the hemp agriculture in Utah is it is specialized. There are more restrictions on hemp agriculture than there are on medical cannabis agriculture, specifically because of the alkaloid composition. So why would you hire a consultant, right? Would you skip ahead to the next one?
Yeah.
So one interesting thing, well, the answer obviously is high quality cannabis, right? Everybody wants to grow a lot of cannabis and also have its composition be quality enough that you can extract a high amount of oil from it, or have it smell very nice when you smoke it, for example, or to have high concentrations of medical compounds like CBD, for example. Skip ahead. And what I'm seeing in Utah is that there's a lot of, firstly, contamination of product and destruction of product. And what I mean by that is, as you can see in the pictures that I've pulled up, there's a lot of problems with cannabis cultivation. Cannabis, because it's a dioecious, herbaceous, sexual plant, it really only is meant to live for a year, okay? It wants to die. In fact, its hormones are programmed to make it die and to make it susceptible to pathogenic infection, okay? This picture up here in the right corner is powdery mildew. Almost all clients that I've ever had at one point have had to deal with powdery mildew. And there are a lot of ways to prevent the contamination and also the spread of powdery mildew by manipulating the environmental variables in which your cannabis is being cultivated, okay? There are also other methods. One thing that we've been testing out is bacteria, which actually eats that fungi. That's had a lot of success. There are certain bacteria which have adapted and evolved specifically to eat these kinds of fungi. And so if we culture those bacteria and inoculate plants with them, we can fight off pathogenic infections. We've had a lot of success with that. Sometimes, like with a plant like this that's pretty far gone, you would typically remove that plant material, if not the entire plant, just to stop the spread of contamination. And I noticed there's a lot of waste in Utah, a ton of waste. Most of my clients are just burning or not disposing of their plant biomass after they have, trimmed up their buds and things like that. I noticed that there is not really a lot of utilization of the stalk in processing for fiber. So the people who are growing for buds, for smokables, for extracts and things like that, typically they're just destroying the entire stalk when that's a sellable product that you could use to recoup revenue for your business. So the entire plant should be usable, and none of it really should be destroyed. And if you are going to destroy the biomass, composting is a perfectly viable option that the legislature has approved. So go ahead and compost your plant material. Don't just burn it. All right. So I like to talk a lot about integrated pest management. You don't need to spray hazardous chemicals on your plants. There are a lot of research studies showing that what you spray onto the plant gets absorbed into the plant, and most of it stays in the plant and doesn't always change. And when you consume it, when you smoke it, when you extract from it, you're also taking with it those toxic chemicals, and people who are using this as a medical product don't need to be contaminated by bad agriculture. So I like to teach people a lot about the beneficial insects, the predatory insects, and also how to spot out the good bug or the bad, the good and the bad bugs. Because you want to leave the good ones alone and give them what they need to thrive. Keep them around, and you want to kill every bad bug that you can find. This is a super funny picture that I took of a client's property in Provo. I don't know if you can see very well, but this is a cannabis plant, and these are the weeds around their plant. What's that?
Purslane around it.
Yes, yes, and it does really well in the native Utah soil. It can tolerate the high amount of salt near the lake, which is where this was grown. The cannabis plant cannot. So when I got to this client, it was just a mess. And we pretty much had to go through by hand and physically remove all of these plants. They didn't have plasticulture down. I found that there's been a lot of benefit in Utah to plasticulture, not just for weed prevention, but for holding in moisture. The humidity here is too low for cannabis agriculture, and you need to compensate for that in the soil if you're growing outdoors. All right, next one, buddy. So we do a lot of plant diagnostics. This is something I'm training other consultants on right now. Diagnostics of nutrient deficiencies can be very difficult because it can be easy to mistake one for another. Also, you can have more than one at the same time, which can make it even more confusing as the diagnostic characteristics can overlap. There can also be other things that can cause nutrient deficiencies other than actually being deficient in nutrients. All right, go ahead on the next one. So I like to talk a lot about, soil quality. We'll get to that in just a sec. I had to put this up because it applies to what a lot of people are doing here in Utah. So a lot of people are asking me about, when's the best time to harvest? How should I time out when I'm getting, my estate checks done? How do I tell if I have males and females? What does a hermaphrodite look like? When I'm trying, this is a temperature chart of different alkaloids and the temperatures and the duration of that temperature that they need to be at for you to successfully decarboxylate it. Decarboxylating is taking a molecule that's inside of a plant or a molecule in general and making it bioavailable. You're separating off of the acetyl group in this example. You're making it so that your receptors can actually interact with it, right? So CBD-A, THC-A, they don't directly interact with the endocannabinoid receptor system in humans and animals. So by removing that acetyl group by decarboxylating it, you're making it so that it's actually medicine, right? And that's a critical step in this process. All right, let's get it. You like my transitions? All right. Yeah. So I've been seeing clients all over the state this year, which has been really great. Like I said, I did agriculture of cannabis in 5 states. I started in California, then I moved to Washington, Oregon, and Colorado during their first couple of years of legalization. So when I came out here to Utah, I kind of knew what to expect. It's actually been very similar to what I saw in Colorado. There's a lot of startup businesses, there's a lot of excitement, and I think it's super awesome. I did want to show you guys this cool kit on the right. So one of my clients with Happy Valley Hemp, I don't know if you guys have heard of them, they've been to some of the conferences. He's actually got this filled kit where he can come out on site and test out your plant material for you, which is really great because a lot of places are having to send off plant material to different locations to have it tested, which is extra waiting time and typically a fee that is a little bit excessive, making it hard to compete economically in this industry. And so I think there's a lot of excitement about this. I want to point it out. If anybody needs that kind of testing, let me know and we'll send them out for you. All right.
Is that question? Are you aware that's going to be mandatory then for hemp cultivations to have it tested, even if you're not?
Yeah, the Department of Agriculture is requiring COAs to legitimize your product, and before it can be shipped anywhere, you have to have that certification typically.
So it can't be done on like a processing end, somebody that's already purchased it. There's essentially a few phases of testing.
You actually can test different substrates, interestingly. Yeah. So you can test a tincture, an ethanol extract. You can test oils. You can test raw plant material. You can test dry plant material. Dry is typically the best that I've found. for this kind of kit.
Right.
More advanced laboratory equipment would be able to do more in-depth analysis, but this gives you at least alkaloid composition. Yes.
Can you buy the testing stuff and get into that yourself?
You can. It's not cheap, but definitely you can.
15 grand, I
About
think, for his kit.
15,000.
15,000, and then for the add-ons for terpenes, there's another 5. So,
Yeah.
but that tech's still up there. I mean, it's way out. It's way more awesome that we can test stuff
It's
nowadays.
Impressive though. You
Yeah.
have a laboratory in a little briefcase. So
10 years
I'm
ago,
so
you
excited.
couldn't go to the dispensaries and get the profiles that you can get
Yeah.
now that they can see. So you know what you're getting compared to is a little
Yeah.
more guessing. When I first got into it medically, I was like, I hope this has the right content, whereas I know exactly what I'm getting now.
And it wasn't a full spectrum analysis, but it did have a pretty good list of alkaloids and terpenes, enough to show you what you're doing. Yeah.
So you are a tester.
Yeah, I've been in and out of the industry for 10 years from growing to but mainly I got into it medically. I had a massive head injury, and that started didn't touch it before that. So you get 22 staples in your head and go the route of cannabis over opiates. So that's what I did.
It's a good way to go. I see Derek all over the place. There's Utah Cannabis Education, and definitely worth checking out.
Renee, it's not too late. Christmas is coming up. You're gonna go to Santa.
I'll probably just get past this one. These are some experiments that I did this year, and I spoke at Silicon Suds.
Yeah, but where's Mario?
Yeah, there's Mario. He asked me to let you guys know. He apologizes for not being able to make it. He's still on his way. Might show up last minute. We'll see.
He has to have others drive for him, so that he's dependent on others for a ride because of his eye condition. So
I think he said someone was giving him a ride.
Yep.
He wanted me to let you guys know that. I'm checking right now. Okay. He apologizes for not being here, and he's on his way, so he actually will be here soon. Okay. Also, yeah. So this is Ryan with the Utah Cannabis Association, and this is Joel. He manages a lot of the events with City Weekly, and both of these guys are really big supporters of the cannabis movement here in Utah. And you will see them at upcoming events if you haven't met them already. Freedom of Choice has done a really good job there. I actually heard a radio ad the other day. What is their location in Salt Lake called? Do you remember?
Oh, TrueMed?
Yeah. So
TrueMed's there. Yep.
Is passing out prescriptions right now for people who are eligible. You do
Helping you get your letter
course.
for medical.
Yeah, you get a recommendation. And what's really cool is that right now, pretty much you're in limbo in the law, right? If you got caught with cannabis on you, they would give you a ticket. You go to court, you show them your letter of recommendation, and waive the charges. It's pretty much how we're set up at this point until people can get official cards, which isn't anywhere until March next year. Okay.
From what I understand, the doctor will be the portal for that, yes?
The doctor provides you the recommendation, and then this is a bit of a gray zone. There's supposed to be specialists who are like cannabis certified medical professionals that are going to be recommended by the physician for you to go to, and they will prescribe you. So not every medical doctor will be able to prescribe you, but they can give you the recommendation if they're an MD or a PhD psychiatrist.
And PAs.
All right.
And MPs.
Really? Wow. Okay. Cool. Yeah, like I said, it's changing all the time. It's hard to keep up on all
Oh,
of
it's
it.
with the original.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I made sure I have it.
Oh,
I'm
cool.
a PA.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, will you go to the next one, buddy?
Yeah.
So these are farms just here in Utah that I visited this year. There's been a lot of impressive growth. This is a 2-story operation in Orem.
It's Ethos, right? CBD Ethos? Or is
Or
that the other? Oh, no, that's Orem. He's up
No,
north.
it's
Yeah, that's a
all-
different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's different.
Why is it so purple in
Because of the LEDs, LED lights that they're using. Oh, okay. Yeah. Combination of the red and the blue spectrum lights that they're using on the LED. But I thought it was awesome because it's a vertical grow. Very few people do vertical cultivation, and I think it's super great. An interesting thing about these guys is they're growing just for seeds, right? And they weren't doing anything with their biomass. I'm like, hey guys, they were literally throwing it in the wood chipper after they removed the seeds. I'm like, okay, so you guys are going in the negative financially. Let's recoup your cost, a little bit. And so we hooked them up with a processor who is now buying all of their plant material, and it's no longer going in a wood chipper. This is Derek's out here.
Yeah, that was Felicia.
Down in Levant. Oh, okay.
That was the name of that.
Felicia?
That one was, yeah. That was Felicia. Yeah, no, we were down in Lavana. We did a grow down there. We did about 600 plants. Did a bunch of different strains, learned a bunch. We didn't get our plants in until July 11th. So, and then we got our second set of clones in, I think it was like the end of July. So it was a lot of fun. We had to convince the parents, because that property and their family, the grandfather was the mayor of Lavan back in the day. So when all of a sudden their property is now growing hemp, it kind of caused a little, because it was like, it's okay, we're doing this legit, but no, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do it out there.
Yeah, but these are actually pretty good colas for the soil that they were in and the humidity of that area as well.
Those plants, all those clones that did not grow as good as they should have, we got them 3 clones to a cup. So we had three clones in a solo cup that we had to first break apart the roots. Why you don't want to do that is that stunts them. So they had been cloned in March, and we didn't. Yeah, it's like a lot of that type of stuff is like that will mess your plants up. But if you stick them through that cup, it gets used to that size of the cup. It goes, cool. I don't want to get any bigger than this. Which is good if you want to control that, but it definitely messed up. We didn't get as much of a yield this year because of that. So
these were autoflowers?
Some of them were. They were all Oregon CBD seeds. So I don't think they were autoflowers. No, they all. We just loved them, and they grew well. So
yeah. And as you can see, they did a drip system.
The mulch.
No plastic culture, and you can see the weeds in here. I know you guys went through and manually removed a lot.
We were manually removing them, but no, we'll mulch late next year. This year, that was the tools we had. We dug holes, so we actually dug our plants down to the ground a little bit, so they were down about 6-7 inches, so the wind wasn't hitting them, so they kind of had a little bit more of a base. So depending on your farm, is kind of how you'll design a lot of your stuff.
Yeah, check out the weather in your area
and know what you're dealing with.
Wind, you'll get a lot of contamination. So this farm out here, they use plastic culture, and it stopped a lot of the negative plants that you see around. But they still got a lot of wind just because of the surrounding area. And so we actually had to do a washing process right as we harvested the plants to try to remove some of the dirt before they started drying and curing. And what was really nice, though, is the plastic culture made it so that we were able to maintain the humidity in the vascular system of the plant, which is really important. So on one of my future slides, you'll see that I talk about the different parts of the plant, and everything above ground we call the phyllosphere. And the phyllosphere, it's getting influenced by the light and the temperature above, but really everything else is coming from the soil. And so if the soil is at a very specific state of humidity and overall moisture in the soil and has oxygen, then the plant's going to be able to breathe and grow all the time, which is great. And one last thing, a lot of these plants, they look really big and good, but they were actually highly infested with mites. So on one leaf, you could just with your eye see 3 varieties of mites. And let me tell you, I have to use a microscope to see some of them because they're so small. So if you can see some, then there's definitely more likely others that you can't see.
Just a question.
Yeah.
With the mulch, when you said mulch, like, how did you do that? What did you do?
Yeah, well, the mulch layer, you'll actually have like the equipment you put on your tractor that does that plastic mulch. So what guys will do is they'll do drip tape underneath the mulch, and that's how they'll set up. So we just did a drip line on mine. Definitely from seeing what other people do, I'm like, yeah, drip tape with a mulch layer is the better way to do it for, a lot of things he said as far as keeping the water in this dry environment. It's very different from California where you're near the ocean and your humidity and everything like that, completely different growing environment where it stays more stable. Here we're dealing with this up and down, and it definitely it was a lot of learning that I learned from my experiences in California and stuff out here. A lot of extremes we deal with out here.
And let's actually talk about that for a sec. So cannabis evolved in Southeast Asia in a subtropical climate where all of the soil is essentially compost. That's what it evolved and adapted to thrive in. Okay. Here in Utah, we're looking at about 30 to 50% of that amount of humidity in comparison. Okay, and so you need to double or triple the humidity exposure to your plant if you can, if you're growing outdoors. But you can't really control the humidity outdoors very much. What you can control is the soil. Okay, and so with the plastic culture, I love it. I wouldn't use just straight mulch. I think that here in Utah, it's ideal to use a bit of a mixture. If you can use a very small amount of the native soil, that's good, but really small, like 1 to 2% at the maximum. The rest, you really want it to be compost and things that help with aeration, peat moss, coconut coir, and things like that. Utah soil has a lot of sand and salt and clay, okay? And that's essentially, when you add water, the recipe for concrete. And it prevents the roots from permeating into the soil, and it also locks up nutrients, making it so that the plant can't even access them if they're there, all right? And so by controlling the soil, you control the plant. And if you can learn about the soil, you'll be far ahead of people who don't learn about soil. And that's a lot of what I'm going to try to talk about today. So one thing I really like to point out statistically is that in the first 2 years that I was in Colorado, I followed what was happening with the businesses, and 90% of the businesses that were focused on cannabis failed in the first year. And of the survivors of those businesses, the second year, 90% of those failed. And there were a lot of startups in Colorado. People were so excited. And it was really interesting because people who were opposed to it all of a sudden were big supporters, you know how that goes. So these are the traits that I found common among the businesses that are still going, that were successful during that first 2 years, like we are now in Utah. So I like to point out following legislature is a good idea, because there's nothing worse than having an inspection, someone telling you, oh, I'm sorry, you need to destroy tens of thousands of dollars of plant material because you did something wrong, right? And trust me, that happens to everybody. Don't feel bad. I've had to tell a client to burn $40,000 worth of plant material before because he allowed powdery mildew to get onto every bit of it. So being sustainable is another really big thing. In the cannabis industry, these successful businesses are very consistent. They try to make everything the same as much as possible, and that enables you to get more harvests per year. There's some people who are doing 4 to 6 harvests per year because they have the right flow, the right genetics, the right setup, and they're able to be productive year-round. Okay, so I love talking about the cannabis microbiome. It's what I've been researching all year. I'm trying now to get a research grant to start collecting samples around the state to study the microbes on the plant, and in the soil around the plant. I think it's very crucial. It's what motivated me to go back to school. And it's because the more I was exposed to it, the more I realized that soil microbes consist of the majority of the plant biomass. If you add up all of the biomatter on the plant, most of it's bacterial and fungal. It's crazy. And they do so many things for the plants. Like, plants don't have a natural immune system like we do, right? And they're actually dependent on the symbiotic relationships that they have with bacteria and fungi to prevent pathogenic bacteria and fungi from infecting them. They also, for example, in the soil, nitrogen fixing, phosphorus fixing fungi, they take forms of nitrogen that are fixated in the soil that the plant can't use, and they essentially manipulate the electrons on them and put out a waste product as they eat it, and that waste product is food for your plant. Okay, and so having living soil is crucial. Keeping the soil alive is crucial, and if you do that, you'll notice that you have to actually, you can feed less nutrients to your plants, you can give them less fertilizers, that they'll be far more resistant to insects, to adapting to local soils. For example, like I said, there's a lot of salt here. Cannabis is not a salt-loving plant. It hates it. It will die from salt. But if you have certain bacteria, it can make it tolerate the salt more. It can make it tolerate the temperature changes a little bit more. Makes them more survivable. So, I kind of already mentioned these are the different parts of the plant. It's important to know that each of them are in a different environment. You know, what's going on above ground is a little bit different from what's going on below ground, and so on. All right, go ahead. So, I really like pointing this out. Plants photosynthesize, and a byproduct of photosynthesis is, you know, taking in CO2 and putting out O2, right? They're fixating that carbon and they're taking it out of the atmosphere. A lot of people don't know that plant roots, their biochemical cellular mechanisms require oxygen, okay? So plants actually use oxygen in their roots, and if they don't have that, they can't do those biochemical cellular reactions. And so it's critical for the soil to have oxygen, not just for the plant, but also for the microbes that breathe that oxygen as well, the beneficial bacteria and fungi. Interestingly, those beneficial bacteria and fungi typically also breathe oxygen, and the pathogenic kind that hurt your plant can exist in an anaerobic environment, in an environment that has no oxygen or very little oxygen. And so if you don't have oxygen in the roots, you're way more susceptible to pathogenic infection of your plant, to powdery mildew infection. It also makes the cell membranes of the root systems more susceptible to microbes entering the vascular system of the plant. So I like to point that out because I think it's really important. That's what I did my experiment on this year. I'll be presenting at USU on the impacts of air in water on plant biomass, if anybody wants to make it up there. All right, so these are some pictures done in experiments on cannabis root systems and how they distribute. So as you can see, there actually is a taproot in the cannabis plant. When you do a clone, you do not have a taproot, okay? And that means that the plant is not going to be as well structured, so it won't grow as well vertically as a plant that has a taproot. Also, the root system will not permeate as deeply into the soil, so it won't have access to as many nutrients. Typically, you need to plant clones a little bit deeper than you would a seeded plant. So I like to point that out. Okay, we'll go past this one real quick. I mentioned some of the areas before, but I like to point it out because it shows some of the nodulation of different plants and how plants will actually culture microbes, kind of like humans do. Is it the pancreas that cultures? Okay.
What?
Does the pancreas culture microbes for humans, or what organ does that?
Your intestinal tract.
The whole thing. Okay.
Yeah,
So
entire intestinal tract.
so plants will develop nodules for that same reason, to harbor beneficial bacteria and fungi and feed them sugars and starches and things like that. And what's happening in this chart that I'd like to point out is the surface area of your root. This is the root right here. There's only so much surface area, but if you have fungi growing mycelium around the root, you're increasing the surface area and access not only to water but to nutrients that are in the soil. And so these are almost mini roots that are attached to your roots. If you have fungi in the soil, your plant's going to get a lot more moisture and nutrients.
So symbiosis?
Yes, very, very fundamentally symbiotic. There are biologists that argue that land plants would never have evolved without these specific symbiotic relationships because they can't survive in these environments by themselves.
It's like the truffle, one of the more expensive ingredients out there.
Yeah.
Is, the reason why it
Yeah.
is because of the tree that it grows on.
Yeah, it has a specific ectomycorrhizal fungal symbiotic relationship with that tree, and that tree benefits from having that fungi because it pulls in nitrogen for it, which is really cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, right. Go ahead, my friend. So this is some stuff that we did this year. You can't really see my assistant behind this plant here, but she's there. So one of my clients had operation down in Moroni, and we had to quickly harvest because he was just getting pounded by really low weather, and his plants were starting to get shocked. It was pretty close to the harvest time, so we decided to pull them all inside of this warehouse. Originally, this warehouse was actually pretty gross, and what we did is we sealed it off with plastic and sanitized the floor as much as possible, and then we used it was a turkey farm at one point, and we had to get it into a state that we could actually use for cannabis. And so this is a homemade HEPA filter system, and these are HEPA filters on top, and it's continuously pulling air in and shooting it. I'm sorry, I'm saying it backwards. It's pulling air out and then pushing out clean air, and then on the exits, we're getting all of the pressure pushing the air out. And so there's constantly air being pushed out, and so we don't have spores coming in, and the air that is coming in is going through a HEPA filter, and really nothing, no fungal spores are going to get through a HEPA filter. And so I've been training consultants to do different types of work. One of them is trimming. This is one day of trimming. You can't even see the whole bin. As you can see, we had green thumbs at the end of the day. You got to earn that green thumb. This is another project I did for a client who is trying to do extracting, and so I taught them a lot of techniques and methods where you can extract the alkaloids from the plant material, and you can activate those alkaloids, making them bioavailable medicinally. And what's really great about this is it took all this biomass. What we extracted here was from about 1.25 pounds of biomass, and we got it down to a pretty small amount, which is really great for shipping and storage. Typically, extraction processes will sanitize the product as you're extracting it. So, for example, using Everclear kills everything that it touches, right? And so this client is trying to make edibles, and we're going to further process these extracts for edibles. All right, go ahead. So a lot of what I've been doing this year has to do with pests, identifying them, and creating plans to eradicate them, integrated pest management plans, where we can have an organic approach to removing these pests, preventing them in the first place. And there's a lot of exciting techniques for that. So I got a grant from the state, very thankful to them, to get this microscope. It has a camera on it, and so I'm able to take high-resolution images of samples that I collect from different farms, as you can see, and I seal them off because I don't like to spread potential contaminants. And you'd be surprised, you can see some pests, but most of them you cannot see. This is a 4,000x magnification. This is not my image, but this is some electron microscope imagery of powdery mildew. And this is some powdery mildew. I'm sure everybody who's grown cannabis has seen powdery mildew at one point or the other.
Can the powdery mildew, can it be airborne too, or just?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a spore reproducing fungi, and so they will make little spores and go into the air. And essentially, it's all over all of us. It's all over the soil, all over the earth. It's in the atmosphere. It's everywhere. And so you're really not going to grow cannabis without it unless you're in a laboratory pristine condition. What you can do is give the plant microbes that are beneficial to it that will fight off that pathogenic fungus. So you want to promote the beneficial microbes. One I've been reading about recently, too, actually I want to talk to you about, are really fascinating. So there are some bacteria which have evolved and adapted specifically to eat that fungi, okay? And so if you can make it an environment that is good for that bacteria and inoculate the plant with that bacteria, you can kill this fungi. They'll just eat all of it, right? You can also do techniques like physically removing infected leaves. If it's that gone, take it off your plant, of course. Even if it's like a third that gone, I would rip it off, right? That being said, it's not just on the outside. It will go into the vascular system of the plant and go throughout the entire plant anyway, right? So there's nothing you can do except for give it microbes that can fight it, that eat it, right? That's the best thing you can do. And there are actually products available specifically for that, if you look for them. Another one that I'm really loving is a bacteria that evolved to eat chitin. Okay, chitin is what the cell membrane of insects are made out of. Okay, and this bacteria eats chitin. All right, and so what you'll see is, you'll get mites, you'll get aphids, and they'll be there. You'll see them, and then you'll see a bunch of dead bugs all over the place, and that's awesome. That's what you want, is dead bugs, right? All right, go to the next slide. Look at this demon face right here. that was kind of down by where you are, actually. And so these are some pests I've taken pictures of this year, And I'm really lucky to be involved in the scientific academic community at UVU. I have access to a lot of biologists. Some of them are entomologists, professionals who have been able to help me to identify a very specific pest. And that's important because if you don't know exactly what it is, it's nearly impossible to remove it organically. Different mites have different behaviors. You remove different mites differently. Some of them are tens of thousands of times the size of other mites, right? And they all have different behaviors. And for example, this is just a little silkworm, horrifying creature. All right, where you go to the next one?
Hey, I got a question. For you.
Yeah.
So the chitin-eating what was that?
Bacteria.
Bacteria.
Yeah.
Would that also have a possibility of killing your beneficial bugs as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a last resort,
Yeah.
but as opposed to spraying synthetic chemicals that the plant
Let's-
and humans can't metabolize.
We had a lot of ladybugs
Oh,
last year,
yeah.
so
I love
don't
ladybugs.
want to do anything to give them any.
Yeah. There are actually companies who are specifically breeding, and I can provide you guys some information on this. They're breeding just predatory insects of a variety of types. So essentially, you can try to identify or send them samples of or pictures of pests, and they will say, okay, this insect is the one that will eat that. We're going to ship you some. And so ladybugs are awesome, but they can only eat certain sizes of insects. If they're too small or too big, they can't eat it. Same with like praying manti. Praying manti can't eat T-and-well mites because they can't catch them, right? And so there's a different predator for every insect, and that is the best approach. You are right. The bacteria will kill beneficials. Yeah. So what we typically do is waves. Beneficial insect, predatory, insect pathogenic microbes.
I use pirate bug.
Pirate bugs, yeah.
Pyre bugs?
Pirate.
Bugs. Okay. So I have to see the Latin name. I have a big list of them. But what do you use those for?
I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Just use it. We use it. This was our
Pirate bugs, ladybugs, and praying mantis, and,
yeah.
That's
It was
a good
our,
combo.
and guinea hens.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah, chickens and hens, they'll pick at your plants. Ducks, people are having a lot of luck with ducks because they don't care about the plant at all. They just want the bugs and then they run off. And so I know a lot of people who are doing cannabis agriculture who have ducks on the property and they cycle in between different locations. I had to put up this slide because these are some cool mutants that I was exposed to this year. So
Yeah, we did.
you can see polypoidy is what this is called. And I'm still a student, still learning about it, but what I understand is that it has two full sets of DNA, which is super interesting because it actually has, in every position that there's a leaf, there's two leaves, for example. It's almost growing into itself. And if you ever find a fat stem like this,
We have one of those. and
Do
it
ya?
was the coolest
Yeah,
thing.
it's a
I
mutant.
thought I needed to put it in a case or something. like
they are
beautiful.
unique. I like to document them. And what I'm seeing is that this is potentially a byproduct of feminization. So the companies that are feminizing seeds or even the genetics of the plant are having this mutation as a byproduct. And then this is called fasciation, and it's really interesting because it's a genetic disorder with the chloroplast of the plant. So it's not photosynthesizing correctly, which is why it's white. But interestingly, the gene associated to this mutation is also associated to the biosynthesis of alkaloids. And so you'll actually get some really strong concentrations out of these guys, even though chunks of them are white, which is, I think, pretty cool. They are very susceptible to fungal mildew pathogenic infection. Their nugs are very dead.